Thanks. Ahmed's here. Ahmed's here with us having a conversation, a courageous conversation. We've been wanting to connect about the delegations. I was able to, we're the delegations in question right now, are the ones that we're going to be kind of unpacking are from April 19th. Hopefully we'll get some of these out. Maybe what I'll do again is I'll share my screen so that people can see how to access the delegations. So when you go into, can you see my screen, Ahmed?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so if you're at the WRDSB.ca website, if you go here to trustees, and then you go right up here into the meetings, this year's meetings, then you scroll down and you see all of the months there. We're in May now, all of a sudden, and we're going to be looking at April 19th. The agenda is there. And if you ever want to watch the meeting, you can watch live the day of through your own, the privacy of your own home, or you can attend in person. And they're at 7 o'clock at 51 R Delta Ave, Kitchener. So this is the one we're looking at today. We kind of I went through the French immersion, which is a long video, but we're going to be going into these ones here. And was there one in particular that kind of got you? I know when I'm watching these, were you watching live or did you see?
I was watching live for the first two, but then I had to attend to my kids, so I missed the last one. But then I watched it afterwards, and I watched them all again in preparation for us to just chat about them, just so they're fresh in my mind. That
That's good. I haven't seen them in a while, but I remember how I felt watching them. And it's just kind of like you're in prison, having to listen to these words coming out of these people's mouths, and like there's so much objection to it. Like you want to be able to say something right away. I was saying in my other video that there almost has to be a better way for us to go through these, because the amount of time it takes to listen through all of these and then come up with some sort of discussion about how inaccurate it is to have some sort of validity to what's going on. It just takes up so much time. So if we can figure out a better way, it will be good. But I was thinking of these ones in particular. There's three here that are on the same topic. No, wait, are they? Yes. I don't know if there's one in particular you wanted us to grab, or what are you thinking?
Well, to be honest with you, like in my mind, it kind of felt like it was core, and it's just my opinion. I have no basis of fact to say this, but felt like it was coordinated, and it felt like it was kind of set the stage, come in and lay in really the quiet parts, and then the last one was kind of like an overall, draw a bigger picture of what
More
is
of an attack
happening.
almost, right?
Yeah, so it was almost, and the message, it was the same, different ways of putting it, but pick one and we'll get to that message. I'm sure.
Well, you know what? Maybe let's do, how about, because in light of what's happening with the Catholic school board as well, with all the anti-Christian stuff happening, I'm wondering if maybe we'll look at Justin Burr's. I kind of, I forget some of it, but maybe we can take a look at that and then we can kind of add some thoughts, or if there's anything that's misleading or flat out lie.
Yeah.
The thing that I don't get, I don't know if you have thoughts on this, but is that I think they're referring to us, right? Like when I'm listening to these presentations, when I see the Twitter posts, I mean, all of these activists, they're talking about you and me and David Toder and anyone else, and Julia, like anyone who's spoken up against this agenda and this narrative. I shouldn't say agenda, speaking up against this narrative, right? The narrative that the WRDSB is putting forward, because who else is it that they're talking about? Or are they talking about someone else, other people who are hateful? Like, are they just
talking about us, and they're trying to draw a picture of us being hateful, and it's obviously not true. Like, we know it's not true, but the way to communicate that out is just to continue to ask those questions and continue to not, be provoked, break down their ideas, because some of these ideas that they've brought up, I feel like, right away, I want to stop them and say, no, that's not right. And if you're going to base the rest of your 7 minutes, because you're saying this in your third minute, on this then it's a fallacy, right? You're basing it all on a fallacy because that's not true.
Exactly.
Right? And if you confront them that way, sometimes it's like, take a pause for a second, right? Because they clearly say parents' rights are not important. Yes, I get it, the child has a right, but why is it conflicting with parents' rights?
Right. And we're talking about good parents. We don't want parents who are neglecting their kids to have the rights. Right. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about good parents, and good parents have a role to play in ensuring that their child's rights are protected. Like, that's my job as a parent, and having my rights protected as a parent is so that I can speak for my child and protect my child and their best interest. So what I find fascinating is, I think it was Justin who mentioned parent rights. Yeah. And is he a parent? Like, is he a parent?
I'm not sure.
I don't think so. We have these activists coming up and saying these things, debating this, and they're not even parents themselves, and some of them aren't even in this, they're not even in the system. They're not even in the school board anymore. So they're not students, and they're not parents of kids with students or kids in the system.
And the only input that I can think of that would be valid from such a person, especially if we look, and say it's a relatively young person, is either an educator's input or a child's input, right? If you're not a parent, you're a child. If you're not a child, you're an educator. Otherwise, you're not really experienced in the subject. Yeah, you're a stakeholder because you want the best community, right? Yeah. But parents want the best naturally. And again, we're talking about good parents, right? There is the outliers.
Yeah, we're always talking about good parents here.
Yeah, there is the outliers for sure. I'm not going to deny it. And there is systems in place to address that. But when we're talking about the school system, we're assuming the parents that are interacting with the school system are good parents, right? With good intentions for their kids, for other kids, for their society, just like everybody else, right?
That's right. Otherwise, we have activists coming up with some other agenda at hand that, how do they have a stake at what's going on with our schools? That's right. With our kids. Okay, so let's put this one on then. So let's go through Justin. He's talking on confronting and preventing anti-2S LGBTQ plus hate in schools. So we'll go through that one. Before I play this, I wanted to just highlight that I noticed that they allowed over 10 minutes for the speaker. Did you notice that?
No, I didn't.
So he starts here and he speaks for 11 minutes and 53 seconds. Mm-hmm. Considering last year, I remember David Haskell was cut off a minute early. He didn't have his time. I don't find this democratic at all. I don't find the board to be operating in a professional, non-biased level at all. It's incredibly deflating, and I'm having a really hard time with just allowing that to continue.
Well, let's listen to it. I agree with you 100%, but I wonder if the last couple of minutes were so captivating that they didn't, look at the clock, because what could he have been saying in the last?
Well, they were so captivating, Ahmed, as we know. We've seen this time and time again. Mm-hmm. We don't even get our questions and concerns forwarded to staff to be answered. Yet a hateful delegation comes on like this, and we have excitement about having copies. Like, I don't know how people can't see this. I don't know how the board can't see this. Anyway, let's listen.
In the upside down world, he's not hateful, we are. And you got to remember, that is the premise, right? So he is really celebrated by the same ideologues that are on the board, right?
Exactly.
That really believe the same thing he does.
All right, shall we?
Go ahead.
On top of that, just a warning that I will be discussing transphobia and other homophobia and other hate speech. I will not be repeating it, but this topic will come up. So if anyone needs to pause or remove themselves or whatever, do that. Take care of yourself first. And then also I have omitted names where required as by the delegation rules, but publicly in other places I do have this presentation available with those names removed if that is of interest.
you.
So I'll start now on the next slide. So we've seen an increasing amount of anti-2S LGBTQ plus hate targeting schools. This recent election saw a coordinated effort by far-right organizations to elect trustees that align with these goals. I created this resource to provide a summary of the issues and the current landscape of the work being done to promote 2S LGBTQ plus inclusion. It's partly inspired by Canadian Anti-Hate Network's resource that is addressing racial hate in schools. Next slide.
Okay.
I agree. There's a lot to unpack in that first.
I was like, well, hold on.
Go back
Okay,
then.
let's go to that other slide then. Ahmed, please.
Okay. Point by point, increasing amount of anti-2S LGBTQ plus hate targeting schools. I really hope that's not the case, but I would like to see the evidence, you know, because unless you're referring to our comments and what we are talking about, as the rest of the presentation clearly does, I'm not aware of this. I think we're a pretty tolerant society. Point number two.
Well, I'll go on with point number one as well. I mean, that's the same thing that happened with the open letter, right? We have a delegate who comes forward. We've had delegates who have come forward about concerns about books, about being misleading, about what that could lead to, about inappropriateness, sexual, content that may be age inappropriate or inappropriate in general. These examples, like for instance, the open letter, let's remind everyone, it was a heterosexual interaction that was brought up. Same with the one that I brought up. It had nothing to do with any community that has been labeled. It had nothing to do with individuals or groups. And it doesn't matter, does it? How many times we can prove that it doesn't have anything. It's basically just, well, I feel like it does. So I'm going to say it does. And therefore it is.
Speechless about that one, to be honest. It's
basically show the evidence. Like, I really do want to show.
Right, so it's not us. Okay, so let's assume the best, and this is not us. So
yes,
let's work to decrease the amount of anti-2S LGBTQ hate. That's fine with me. The second one, the far right organizations to elect people with their goals. I would say far right, far left, all organizations that have some political reasoning behind electing people or endorsing people. We've seen endorsements for the left. We've seen endorsements that seem to be from the right, and you can call it far right, you can call it whatever you want. Has nothing to do with the first point. Third point is resources that show the work being done to promote this inclusion. So you're supposed to say some good stuff there in the presentation. Let's see if that comes up, because I didn't hear any resources that are promoting the inclusion of 2S LGBTQ people, right? All that I heard in the rest of the presentation had nothing to do with that. So I don't know if that's actually covered. And inspired by the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. Okay.
Yeah, well, Anti-Hate, yeah, the Anti-Hate Network is government funded, which we have right now, Trudeau government and NDP. So we've got Liberal NDP majority happening over here. That's who's funding the Anti-Hate Network, people. And these are individuals who consider themselves intellects, that consider themselves above legislation, above human rights. We've got superhuman rights. And people who are stating that they know best for what's going on. They know better, they're highly educated. And anyone who doesn't agree, it's because they're not well informed. It's because they're uneducated.
They're advocating for less freedom.
They're using resources that are completely discredited because of conflict of interest. Huge conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, that was my little vent right here.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have a little bit of those. I think that you're right. Like, I mean, we don't have evidence for any of these. Like, inspired by. Where is your evidence that this has been inspired by? Resources recent election had coordinated efforts by far right. What? Like, if there was any coordinated efforts, I'm seeing, you know, the labor board, I'm seeing the teachers union, talking to the indoctrinated teachers who want a particular ideology to be forced through our systems and being very aggressive about the importance. We saw the video, people. We saw Jeff's video, endorsement video on how there are dangerous people. We see the articles about there being dangerous people. You're labeling people as dangerous. You have no idea. Like, how do you just make up these statements? I'm beside myself.
And you got to remember that we never say dangerous people. We always say dangerous ideologies, or if we speak, that it's a dangerous.
We'll talk about
they
that.
label you as a dangerous person, and where you come from matters rather than the idea that you are bringing to the table, right? So this is a big part of why you can't have a conversation to start with, right? Because you're being shut down before you start.
Yeah. Okay, let's proceed.
Unsafe at school compared to 11% of cisgender heterosexual students. So we see there's an issue of hate within school that is so blatantly obvious. And we have this effort by people trying to put up these human rights for debate. And as Kate has mentioned, and I'll mention later, that we have a very firm international and local rules about rights that need to be upheld. In the US, we've seen restrictions on healthcare, education, free speech, and civil rights for 2S LGBTQ plus individuals. And our school boards have been largely unprepared and unequipped for this. I appreciate the effort that a lot of these trustees have been making, but you are not equipped to deal with this, and I don't expect you to be equipped to understand the ins and outs of extremism and hate groups. And so I'm hoping this resource begins to help you understand it and how we can address this, because it is existing and it's coming for our schools.
So that you are unprepared and unequipped part is just fear-mongering, obviously, right? Like, you're, first of all, treating these elected trustees as a bunch of little kids. You have no idea what's coming for you, right? It's that kind of fear mentality. It's not very helpful, so I'm starting from the end here. But that first
almost
point,
a little bit threatening, I find. Like, I find these it's just manipulating. Like, it's, you're going to have to do better. You're going to have to do more. Like, demanding these things.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first one there, 62% of LGBTQ respondents feel unsafe compared to 11% of cisgender heterosexual students.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the feeling of safety or feeling of unsafety here. And they're using that as a basis to say that there is violence, right? That's the statistic, and that was his finding based on that. So he said, so therefore, we know that there is hate against LGBTQ people.
Yeah.
They're scared, that means there's hate against them, right?
Yep.
Because cisgender people are less scared means there's no hate against them, right? So how is that a proof of that? That's not a correlation, right? If you showed me, 60% of the violence that happens in high schools, for example, happens to LGBTQ versus 11 that's to cisgender, then that's a statistics that talks to unsafe, right?
Right. So this perceived, fear, this perceived notion of potentially being harmed, which, may I add, I think this is going up. The argument is that this is going up. I think we can all agree with this. This perceived fear is going up. Yet look at all of the things that we're doing in our schools that are supposed to be helping and reducing that. Has anyone stopped to wonder, I wonder if when people accuse other people of being hateful towards groups, if that's actually hurting the groups? When I don't hate anyone, like, there is no group, if I don't like someone, it is because of their character and the actions, their behaviors, and what they have shown to me of the person they are, not because of anything that they don't have control over themselves, their race, their gender, their identity, any of those things. And so for me to speak up and say, let's take the books, for instance, and, be concerned about the age appropriateness, and all of a sudden have that twisted on its head to say that I'm a hateful person. I am actually hateful towards these individuals. When do we ever do that to people that we love? I'm just thinking, even with my own children, when do I ever say to hey, George, you know what? That kid hates you over there. You stay away from that kid. He hates you. What? Like, how is that even helpful? How is that remotely helpful? Firstly, it's a lie. And secondly, it's not helpful. Why are you doing it?
And it's provoking. It's like you're somebody who is leaving you alone, not saying anything about you or accusing you of anything or has no intention to do anything, and then you come and poke at them and say you're a hateful person, you're doing this, you're anti this and you're anti that, and it's like, hold on, why are you attacking me? There must be a motive, and you go on the defense, right? Yeah. It's almost like that is the intention, is like they're trying to get us into this defensive mode, because that's when you make mistakes, and then it can be held against you, right? So to stay cool, calm, and objective, and really sit back and focus and not get too impulsive or triggered, as some people like to say the word, is very key. And and a lot of times it's hard. That's why I think it's actually good that we sat back and kind of postponed this a few times, and now we're doing it a week or two later. So it seems like I've had my cool down moment to not be triggered.
Getting riled up again.
Yes.
Like Portuguese blood. So there's three main things for the first one, right? Like we mentioned, perceived fear. Is it even real? Is it something that's being imagined? And how is somebody's tolerance and resilience towards, feeling that something's a personal attack versus that's not my issue. That has to do with them. Like if they're a hateful individual, that's on them. Like that's too bad for them. Why is it impacting our youth in that way? If this is even like an actual, like let's say it's real hate. Let's say it's real bullying. I mean, where's that resilience from our kids for them to understand, like, if this person's being this way, there's something else going on in their life that has nothing to do with me and the person I am. We need to be building that up. So the perceived issue. Then there's what we talked about. Why is it going up? We're causing this like polarization and resentment with our kids. Like we see it with high school kids. They are becoming resentful. Like if they're cisgender and there's nothing special about them, they are getting upset to see like, why are these people being lifted up? Do I have to pretend to be someone else I'm not in order to be lifted up? Like, why can't people see that? And then there's which we didn't touch upon, which is huge. I don't think anyone can deny that we know that there are mental health issues within this labeled population. I'm not saying everyone has a mental health issue in that labeled population. We're saying we know that this has gone up, or that it's more prevalent. And so are they getting bullied because they identify as homosexual or trans or whatever it is? Or are they getting bullied because of the issues that they have, like as an individual?
That's a big point. And it's really hard.
And no one wants to talk about it.
Yeah, it's an uncomfortable conversation, and it's hard to talk about bullying because it's wrong, regardless of
it is wrong.
You are. You should never be bullied. And again, you use the word resilience, but I as I've learned in my campaign, then that word is apparently, considered part of the homophobic and transphobic dictionary.
Well, it's convenient, right? It's a convenient language that they have, isn't it?
Because it's the creation of this victim mentality, like I always say, and you always have a crutch. You always have a crutch to fall on if you don't assume responsibility and, take responsibility for your own actions, and sometimes realize that, other people will make mistakes and judge you. And, it's been said so many times that it's not about, what happens to you, but it's about how you get up and react to what happens to you that matters in the end, right? So let's not dwell on constantly what happens to us. Get up and try to fix it, by no means. And if you're that kind of an activist, then you have my full support. But the activist that's trying to break things and then try to fix them is by no means, an activist in my eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we're mentioning human rights again, and I'm seeing time and time again where these human rights that we're talking about, males going into female washrooms and saying it's their human right. How about the human rights of the women who are in the bathroom who don't agree with it, and they are feeling violated? Like, I'm not here. We're not here to debate like whether, it's right or wrong. I'm just trying to understand why this is being used as I supersede human rights. Like a narcissistic kind of, my needs are what's important. My human rights supersede your human rights. That's not how human rights work.
No. And if there is a conflict in human rights, then they need to be revisited. I'm
That's
sorry to
right.
say, because human rights should not be arguable by anybody. And if two people say this is my right and this is my right, then we have to revisit, that golden rule and look at it from that aspect and say which one is actually, inflicting harm on the other person.
Yeah.
Right? Because as we'll hear now, just bringing up the conversation inflicts harm, right? Like it's like Minority Report. It's like we know what's going to happen in the future because you said that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, restrictions on healthcare, education, free speech, and civil rights for LGBTQ. I don't know much about that. Do you? Like, I don't know the relevance here.
I think I know kind of what they're hinting at as far as like like the therapies and things like that for conversion and what's been happening in some of the states, but I haven't really, we're in Canada, so let's talk about Canada.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I think we've covered most of those. Yeah. You started from the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
You're good?
I am good.
So the Charter and Human Rights outline these rights as protected. Supreme Court has actually even ruled that schools can be held legally responsible for discriminatory actions by students by not creating an environment that stops that. So not only does this board have a moral obligation to protect these students, it does have a legal obligation to protect 2S LGBTQ plus students from hate, from themselves, from the board, and from other students. You have that legal responsibility, even if it is external actions from people, by creating the environment you have. The Ontario Human Rights Commission has specific policies and practices outlined to ensure that you fulfill your human rights code duties. And many WRDSB procedures align with this, specifically procedure 1235. That's about protecting a child's right to privacy, to protect their pronouns or their gender identity from their parents if they do not want that shared with their parents or guardians. And then also, as Kate wonderfully mentioned, there's the UN Commission of the Rights of the Child. We have the rights for free expression, for education, privacy, and access to information. In my document, I go more into depth of how those specifically apply.
Well,
there's lots to say here too, right? I forget kind of how much he goes into. Is he the one that mentions 1235 and how we had a delegation here? Is that the next one? Is that?
I think that might have been the next one. Again,
they're blended together.
I watched them back to back again, so
yeah.
But it was answered a little bit there when he mentioned the last point, the rights for a child. He referred to it with a we. So I think this answers what I said at the beginning about, are you a parent? Are you a child? Or are you, what is your stake in this? So if you're approaching this from the perspective of a child, yes, you can have some problem with disciplinary decisions that parents make, but doesn't make them wrong a lot of the times, right? So
that's exactly
I'm just going to highlight that little point because, that's kind of what I heard there.
Yeah. And where are the lines there, right? When we say free expression, I mean, like, yeah, but they're children. There's a reason why there are so many rules for anyone under the age of 18 or 16, or how is this not logical? How is this not logical, Ahmed?
Well, it's almost like we want to live again where there is no rules and you can do anything you want to do if it feels right.
Yeah, people who are not responsible for other little human beings, particularly, I find.
Want to always live their life.
Okay, shall we continue?
Yes.
I want to go through a few arguments that we see often used by people trying to attack 2S LGBTQ plus individuals. So the first one is age appropriateness of books. We've seen boards targeted with false allegations of pornography, specifically in BC. RCMP even investigated and found that there was it became obviously clear immediately by the RCMP that these allegations were false. As WRDSB has stated themselves, that these are almost exclusively targeting books with 2S LGBTQ representation. And this has been a concerted effort to reframe the issue in order to gain more support. It's a lot harder to get people to try and hate individuals than to make them scared that their children are being exposed to child pornography. It's an outright lie, and it's being perpetuated here and in so many other places. It also argues that queer people's existence isn't appropriate for younger children to understand or read about or see. It's a restriction on the child's rights to access information for their well-being and health, as outlined by international law. And it's also an effort to eliminate the existence of 2S LGBTQ plus individuals from our books and from our education materials. Next slide.
Age appropriate for books. Again, we're having this we're not having the same conversation is what's happening again, right? I mean, for one huge thing that that people really need to realize is any book that we bring forward probably would have some sort of this labeled LGBTQ plus content in it. But there's a reason for that. There is the process called weeding in our libraries, where anything that is no longer appropriate, which this is the hypocrisy that makes me so dizzy, Ahmed. When we're talking about book banning,
has been going on.
We are not the ones who are asking to ban books. The people who are banning the books are those who are the diversity, inclusion, equity individuals who are saying there are certain books that are now harmful to all these labeled segregated populations. Anything that would go against our human rights codes must be taken from the libraries, which they do. So I'm thinking, I'd love to see the evidence. I'd love to see any book that it currently is in our schools that only contains heterosexual sexualized content.
Yeah.
I want to know, because any book that I pull out that has what we call porn,
sexual content,
anything that's sexual content, pictures, graphic pictures or descriptions of sexual intercourse or of a penis or a vagina or nudity. Okay. Any of those things, if I were to pull any single book out and say, listen, I don't think this is appropriate, it is automatically labeled as 2S LGBTQ plus because it has that content in it. The weeding process did that.
Yeah, that's if it didn't, it was not current enough, so they took it out.
That's
and
right.
If it does, then you have a problem with the LGBTQ.
This is the critical thinking that isn't happening.
That's one thing, and it's funny how they say effort to reframe the issue in order to gain more support. It to me, this is now we can get into the schoolyard and point fingers, because that's what I think is happening. Is what this slide is an effort to reframe the issue to gain support, because really the issue is age appropriateness, and he's trying to reframe it to gain support from a community that is so marginalized and so right now in such a way being heard because of the way the tides are shifting, that the most activists will stand and back up this cause, right?
Yeah. And that's where, like, that video that I did with John Euler about the grooming, like the grooming in terms of adults being groomed, and grooming meaning that your intuition has been dimmed down, like you're dumbing down your own instinct, and you're allowing like the doors to be open to this, like, where is the bar for people? And that's the thing, is when we have him stating that it's been proven there aren't actual porn books, guys, listen to me. There are books that have links. There are books that encourage sexting. There are books that encourage you doing your own online research for porn. Guys, we have seen it with our own eyes. These are not lies. It's factual. It is factual. The thing is that people can define pornography any way they want. If people watch porn, well, they don't want to be feeling like they did something wrong, and they don't want to be told that they're doing something wrong. So let's normalize it. People do it, and let's normalize it. Everyone's going to have their own definition of what's right and wrong and what's moral and that's fine. I'm not here to tell you what's right or what's wrong. And that's not what we're doing. Ahmed, that's not what you're doing. I mean, we're not even, this is about, but you don't get to tell our kids what's right and what's wrong either.
That's right.
Like, you don't get to do that. There are families, probably the majority.
That they made clear in this presentation and that previous presentation, which we decided not to go over, which was it's about parents' rights versus child's rights, right? And they are trying to put those two rights, pit them against each other, first of all, and in a way, kind of almost sway the child with their childish naivety and mentality away from the parents and into the institution's arms. Right. And this to me is the ultimate agenda, and ultimate goal is to create this obedient child, right? That's more obedient to the institution than to their own parents.
And Ahmed, how brilliant, because that is the natural, that's just the nature of things with adolescents and children. Like, their job is to create a life that is detached from their parents. That is their job, to figure that out. They're already going to be, rebellious. They're already going to find ways to go against what their parents are telling them to do. How in the world are we living in a society where we have adults who are supposed to be leaders and mentors for our children, telling them not to listen to their parents?
Yes. And celebrating them as heroes for standing up against their parents and choosing the institution. Like when I like in my mind, and when we touch on, you know, kids that don't feel comfortable coming out to their parents, but yet coming out to the institution is okay. It's doesn't that point to a sign that, you know, we're in a broken system? Shouldn't you really be confining in your parents first? If you're not confining in your parents first, isn't that a problem in its own? Shouldn't the counseling be around why you're not confining in with your parents?
Yeah.
Right? Before we get into what it is you're not confining in, right? It's why, what's broken in this relationship that you can't have that conversation initially, right?
And
and nobody wants to look at that.
No. And how I'm going to say evil is it that people use these excuses, like kids don't tell their parents all sorts of things.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things that kids are ashamed of, and they're like, I don't want to disappoint my parents because I love them, and I don't want to disappoint them. And there's all sorts of things that they won't tell their parents. It doesn't mean that their parents aren't understanding and that they wouldn't be someone that you could come and talk to. To have these adults say to other parents, if your kid didn't want to come to you but rather go to a teacher, I think it says a lot about you. Wow.
No.
Look at yourself in the mirror. Look, I can't even, like,
that's again coming from a child's perspective. Now you're becoming
it's that, like,
a child that's coercing. It's like, I expect my my kid maybe to you know, confine in his best friend more than he confines in me, because his best friend is another kid like him, and he'll say, yeah man, your parents, I don't know what they're thinking, they're old school, right? Things like that, right? But when you confine to a teacher and she's the one telling you stuff like that, or he's the one telling you stuff like that, you know, now it's like a problem, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're supposed to be another adult here on the adult team, trying to tell them that no, it's, you don't go get, you know, full body tattoo when you're 10 years old, you know?
Yeah.
Right. So
Yep. These last couple points about this effort to eliminate the existence. Again, where is your evidence? Secondly, this again is perspective and perception of messaging. Okay, you can hear a message. For instance, I've had so many conversations with people who identify in this 2S LGBTQ community that they will state with confidence what someone else means by the words that they state. They know it better than the person who stated it. Mm-hmm. This whole thing, I'm gonna add a perspective here about this whole, like, eliminating the existence of. Okay, I'm not going to deny maybe that there are some hateful people out there who just hate for the sake of hating because of what someone believes that they are, okay, or because of race. Or I'm not denying that there are very hateful people.
There are fars of every side.
Yes, I mean, but let's not waste our time on delegations based on those very hateful people. I don't really, I don't. Again, like we stated, I'm pretty sure all of this has to do with us. So I mean, and I know we're not those hateful people. So again, we're not having the same conversation. Like, we're talking about all these things all over the place. But here's a perspective. I've had, you know, really intense conversations about this. And when it comes down to it, without going into like a whole hour talk on this, when it comes down to it, if you were going to ask me, you know, what I think that means, I think it means that we will be able to create a world where everyone feels and knows that they're valued and appreciated, and that they're thriving just the way they are, the way they've been born. I don't know who would argue that point. Even people who identify as trans individuals, I would challenge you to think about that comment. And is that hateful, or is that wanting the best for our kids? Why would we ever want that for? I'm not saying that it isn't something that maybe people will choose to do, and they will believe that it's the right thing for them to do. And for some, maybe it's the only thing that they can see as the option. Why wouldn't we want a world where people are born and they feel glorious the way they are? Why wouldn't we want that?
Well, I think, Christina, it's so hard to break down this one, because for me, you know, I bring it down, like what you said is amazing, but I bring it down to a more practical thing. And I say, for me, I put people on levels, right? But none of those levels is whether you're queer or cis or black or white or anything like that. We live in Canada, it's 2023, right? So that hate was a surprise to me that it's coming back. It's almost like, you know, how they say trends always come back for some reason, right?
Yeah, we're definitely moving backwards with that, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Anyway, I'm looking at the time. You have to go for one.
Yes. Why? What time is it?
It's like 4 minutes to.
Oh, wow. And we haven't even got through this.
I know. That's what I'm saying. I think it's important though. I don't know how many people will take the time to listen to it, but like,
yeah,
I mean,
well, we might not have to put this whole I think you're gonna have to cut up a few of this conversation as well.
Yeah, I guess so.
And maybe let's get it together with another session, and then sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Ahmed.
Awesome conversation, to be honest, and we can talk about it forever. It's
I know.
We got into 5 minutes, but
and there's so much to say. Like, yeah, it's important though. It really is.
I agree.
Okay.
All right. Well, have a great rest of your day.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Hey, how are you?
Oh, you're wearing a collared shirt. I'm wearing the exact same clothes. Okay. All right. We'll just continue where we left off. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
The other argument we see a lot is parental rights. Historically, this has been raised in opposition to the expansion of children's rights, both in labor rights and children's rights in the States and the UK, is where the origin of this term even comes from. It's often rooted in religious sentiment, specifically Christian, that views parental authority as above almost anything else. And it's an effort to enforce their personal beliefs not only on their own children, but on other children. So if these so-called parental rights existed, they would still be violating other parental rights by trying to enact it in the school and forcing a school to adhere to their beliefs. The Supreme Court has ruled in Canada that there's no basis for parental wishes to have priority. Ultimately, the best interest of the child are paramount. And so we have legal rulings also to outline that our goal is to take care of the children and promote their rights, and our concern should not be for parental rights, because we do not have a proper outline of what those even are or how far they extend. But we do know what the children's rights are, and we need to uphold those. This argument specifically targets teaching subjects, and it's trying to eliminate now not only from our resources, but from discussions that from about 2S LGBTQ plus people from schools. Next one.
It's really hard to argue with something when there is really no logic behind it. You know, like we can bring up an argument and say, oh, this was historically raised by anybody.
Yep. Right? I mean, there's no evidence for this. They just state whatever they want to state. I have no idea. I mean, I've had conversations with board members and with other activists, I guess, like whether they're educators or not even really part of the system anymore, and don't have kids in the system. And they continually say that this doesn't exist. And we see it on Twitter, right? We've seen that a lot, especially in the beginning when we started showing pictures of books and notifying people this, hey guys, this is in our schools, like take a look, is this what you want? And we would continually get the argument, this isn't real, this is you're fear farming, this isn't an actual problem, these books don't even exist, some people would say, this doesn't even exist. And so that whole mentality, I'm realizing that, because the more and more you start having the same conversation with people, it's that they feel that, this is how the best I can explain it, is that our concerns, our parent concerns, aren't really valid. Some of them are like, I feel for you. I know it feels real to you and that you're feeling concerned. I don't think you're making that up, but I don't think it's rooted in anything other than a false fear, like this false evidence appearing real of a made up, misconstrued, far right agenda, and you're not thinking straight. And it's like, no, I can see the books. You see, I can see the books and make that conscious decision for myself. Whether you agree with me or not, in terms of whether you should be concerned about it, isn't up to you to decide. I get to say whether or not these books are concerning. Every other parent gets to share that same voice. Is it concerning to them? If it's not, then they don't stand up. If it is, then they get to stand up and say something, or they're speaking through some people who can, so they're not ostracized for it. And yet, listen to the argument. I'm really hoping that some people will hear this. Like, you are convincing me that I have been misguided. So those who give us like a generous assumption and don't think we're trying to cause harm, think that we are concerned, but that it's based on this fear mongering that has happened with this far right or Nazis or Christo-fascist groups that have infiltrated my brain to make me feel fearful about this. And I need to understand that. Yet look at the conspiracies that are being told. Who has some sort of idea infiltrating their mind? Who has been groomed so far they're tripping over the bar of security for our kids? They have no evidence or basis for this, yet they tell me that my concerns are based on fear. I think it's time to understand that your concerns are based on fear.
And another thing that I say is the language that they use is almost like, how should I say this? So, for example, if you go see a marriage therapist, right, and this is completely unrelated, but just as you're working through a problem, if you say, oh, well, my husband always does this, or my wife never does this, the first thing any therapist or any good therapist would tell you is don't use this always or never.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is generalizing. And through doing that, you're stepping away from the conflict and you're making a constant conflict situation, right? Rather than, oh, you didn't take out the garbage yesterday. Now he never takes out the garbage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes an insult rather than a solution-based conversation.
Yeah.
So in this case, when you're saying
communication 101, how to argue fairly 101, right? Like
that's right. And it's rooted in religious, often Christian views of parental authority. Well, guess what? I'm not Christian.
I was just going to say, Ahmed, can you share with us, like, are you Christian?
No.
Are you white?
You know what? And as far as religious, I think I was raised with some religious instruction as I was growing up, but I don't consider myself a religious person either. As a Muslim, I don't go to the mosque as often as I should, or I don't abstain from the things that as a Muslim you're supposed to abstain from, all of them. But I think it's more moral. It's my moral code and my code of conduct that I put on myself and my children that drives me to have these parental concerns. So for them to draw it as this Christian thing that's coming into the school board, it's a way for them to minimize the problem, first of all, and have people like me say, oh, well, they're not talking about you, so you can just sit down and be quiet, right? And then others like me who are not Christian don't think that they're part of this conversation, right?
Yeah. I think that anyone who can use an argument like this, I mean, the term Christo-fascist or whatever it is, I mean, is so, it's so opposite. I mean, those two terms can't even be together. I mean, you could use a false meaning of Christian, I guess, like when you're looking at, I had to look at Christian nationalists or something, when, someone believes that, oh, this is how I want to live my life. And also, I want you and everyone else to live your life the exact same way I feel like I should be living my life. There has been no evidence of any of us. I am a Christian. That doesn't mean that I condemn or I'm not friends with or love and appreciate anyone who isn't.
That's right.
I mean, a lot of my closest friends are not Christians. And I mean, when we say that, the West has been kind of founded on Christian morality, I mean, that I don't think anyone, Christian or not, anyone who is a good person wouldn't ever, they would be good with that. I mean, you mentioned the golden rule right in the beginning of this, right? Do unto others as you would want done to you. Like, these are all, like, when we say Christian rooted morality, it's the things that we all can agree that are good things. And yeah, maybe we don't need to call them Christian rooted, because I mean, it's just about being a good person.
This is part of the sneakiness here, is that there has been this push in recent years to make religion look bad. Yeah. To make a statement like this.
Let's get this straight. This has been happening this has been repeated over and over again, right? Because it is a threat to any authority that wants power over everyone. They can't do that if they have people following other things of authority.
That's right. And when I say recent, I mean like this renewed effort to paint Christians as regressive people, as violent or barbarian, for a lack of better terms, or anybody who holds religious views is not a modern person anymore. And that's a flawed approach. First of all, religion is a good thing. Faith is a good thing, regardless of what that is. If it drives you to do good things in your life, so be it. There is nothing wrong with it. Let's not try to paint it as a bad thing. But the point on this slide that really hits me, and I would like to kind of get more details or really find out what the bases are, is when he says the Supreme Court says that there is no basis for parental wishes having priority. I'd like to know the specific case in which that said, because I don't see a Supreme Court saying that for no reason.
I mean, my mind goes to, if I'm thinking sensically about this, my mind goes to when a child wants something different than what their parents want, and it's doing harm to the child. Now, that's the thing when we use the word harm. It's like, wow, what are we talking about there? And I mean, we do know that there's abusive parents. We do know that those things happen. We know that divorces happen. And then we've got the children who are caught in the middle, and who do they stay with, and who gets to decide? And I don't know what this, so I would like to know more as well. But I think that we have to think critically about the meaning behind this. What does this entail? Right. It doesn't just mean that kids get to do whatever they want because they feel like doing it. There's a reason why we have parents. And again, it's so absurd to have someone who's not a parent advocating for the fact that we need the kids to decide on. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I am a parent who, anyone who knows me and how I parent, they're always surprised at how much, responsibility I give my kids, and how much, I talk to them like little adults, because they are capable of so much and understanding so much, but there is an appropriateness of how you bring up certain subjects, and because they're new. They're new and they're learning, and just like anything else, I wouldn't just throw them on a bike and say, okay, now go down the hill and you're going to fall a few times. I mean, there are steps that we do. We hold on to the bike at first so that they get a feeling for it. We do that a few times before we let go and we're running beside them. Like, there are processes to these things, and teaching our kids on how to be functioning, thriving, and prosperous adults.
And part of that we discussed last time as well is there really should be no conflict between parental rights and children's rights. And when there is a conflict, when a conflict arises, we have to look at, we can't say, well, always or never, we have to look at that specific conflict and see in that situation who's abusing the rights, because there's got to be an abuse of one of the rights, either the parental or the children's right, for it to create a conflict, like a child coming and saying, I want to get a tattoo, right? If a parent says no, there is a conflict of rights here, right? Yeah. But then when you look at the root of it, the child doesn't have the right to go and get a tattoo without his parents' permission or her parents' permission. So it's not really a conflict of rights, it's a conflict of the interpretation of those rights.
That's right. And you bring up two really good points there. And one, I'm kind of like deviating here, but I'm not sure how much you followed with Jazz. Do you know the story of Jazz? They have a kid's book. I have to check if that's I know that we have it in our public libraries. I haven't checked to see if we have it in the school libraries. I Am Jazz, I think it is. I have the book in. So this book is basically, but she's talking about how she's born a boy and she's now a girl, and that she gets to be this girl. And when you go through the story, it's like, wow, like almost like a fairy tale. Okay. And I say that because we know Jazz's actual story, and we know that she's been going through tremendous health issues, that her surgery had a lot of complications, that she has mental health issues. She has a known eating disorder, severely depressed. She probably will never have an orgasm. Up to now, they don't think she'll ever have an orgasm. Like, yet we're talking to people who say, we want to burn the books. We don't want to be honest. We don't want to talk about real life. We don't like, we're trying to hide, like, let's say critical race theory. We don't want people to know about racism. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We just don't agree in the manner in which you think it should be taught. And so if we want real life, actually, if you're going to have I Am Jazz in this fairy tale of how it is to be in a different, basically a different sex, because you're now changing body parts around, then, I mean, don't we owe that to the kids to show them that it's not as magical and fairy dust-like as it appears in this book, that this is actually the story. And if this is what you really want, despite all of this, then perhaps,
consent, right?
What's that?
I said back to the whole informed consent.
Yes.
There is no informed anymore, right?
There's
Like
no
they
informed.
don't. Yeah.
There's not the real story. Where is it? Like, where's the whole story? Nothing but the whole truth and then nothing but the truth, right? The other thing you mentioned there that's really important. So when you said that there shouldn't be a conflict between children's rights and parental rights, yes, 100% yes. My child is my priority. Like, when I'm hearing about parental rights, but not so much about, and that was one of the delegations, but not so much children's rights. Here, I am here to tell you that I'm here to speak for my child, the very best that I can speak for my child, and how my child needs to be spoken for. So I am speaking for my child. That is the child's rights. Through me, through the parents, they are getting their child rights through their parents. I don't know how else to explain that.
I know it's one and the same, and people unfortunately who have this idea don't believe it and don't think that, because they think, for example, parental rights is like, oh, my right to employ my kid and take his money. That's not what parents are looking. You're not looking to get out of your kid, right?
That's right. We're talking about good parents.
Right is the right to parent, not the right to take from your kid, right?
Right.
So those are not, those don't fall in the parental rights category. And what I say is, the moment my kids were born, I learned that there's somebody in this world that's more important than me. And people don't really understand that until they have kids of their own, I would say. And it's not a feeling that you can describe. So
no.
That's why I say parental rights and kids' rights are the same. And once you have children, you would understand that.
Yeah. They are an extension of us. Like, they are our hearts walking around outside of our body. We will lay down our life for these people. Like,
absolutely.
Anyway, I'm going to get emotional.
Yeah, let's go on with this.
Anything else on this slide? The targets again, right? The targets teaching subjects to eliminate any discussion of no, we're not actually. And actually, if we're going to talk about it again, let's talk about it. The whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Right. And give the warning that he gave at the beginning of this, if you feel triggered, please step out of this conversation,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no trigger warning, is there? Because any talk on, quote, to SLGBTQ plus community is age appropriate no matter what.
Right.
Because as long as it's not heterosexual, if it's something else, it doesn't matter what it looks like, how sexualized, how hardcore, softcore it is age appropriate, my friends. So take note. That is the director, G1, who says that. We have evidence of that, by the way. Not just something I feel like saying. Okay. Shall we go on then?
Yes, please.
We also see accusations of child abuse or grooming directed at educational officials and also in other people working. Again, historically, this has been used against minority groups, specifically Black people, and also in like the gay panic, we saw these things being used, and it's just repeating itself. It's based on harmful stereotypes about 2S LGBTQ plus people. It justifies discrimination, harassment, and violence against these people. And in fact, 2S LGBTQ plus individuals are at a higher risk of experiencing sexual violence. And so these accusations not only aren't caring for the children that are actually at risk, they're further pushing them into harm by veiling the issue under something that doesn't exist. As we said, it's also been used against drag performers. We've seen that very often across countries. And again, this lowers the barrier of violence by justifying actions, because it is a lot easier to get someone to do something violent if they think children's safety are at risk than if they're just thinking it's some political agenda. Next one.
Again, baseless claims with no facts behind them.
Well, I think there are some facts behind this. I do. Now, to state that it has anything to do with you or I or David or anyone else who's spoken up about, and I mean, I don't know who these imaginary people are that they're talking about. Maybe it's people on Twitter that I have no idea is going on, but I do know that my name is directly linked to this messaging. Like, I have evidence of that. So then my mind goes to, well, if you are referring to these people as me, and I know the truth that I am not these people that you speak of, then who are these people? So yes, I do agree when you say there's no basis on that part.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I mean. Is it's a mix of emotionally triggering messaging as well as propaganda, right? Like used historically against minority groups. I haven't used it historically. You haven't, right? So if everything in the world, the world's been going around for a long, long time, and anything anybody can bring up has been used before. None of these are new arguments. None of these are new conversations. So yes, it's been used before. But against minority groups, again, give specific examples, give me a little bit.
He does. He did say he had like a 16-page document or something. So maybe he does. I was just thinking about that when I said, where's your evidence? But again, linking it to something else, like you've said, like linking it to something else that may have occurred doesn't mean that that's what's happening here.
That's right. And harmful stereotypes about LGBTQ plus people. I don't think I've perpetuated one stereotype about LGBTQ people or even mentioned LGBTQ people since I even started my campaign. Like specifically to talk to that specific group, as they're a different group from everybody else. What I've done since the beginning, and I think what you've done and what I think triggers a lot of these activists is we talk to everybody the same way. I talk to all, like, my conversation was towards all parents, all students, all groups, all races. And the fact that I'm not singling out this group, I think is triggering some of these people rather than what should be triggering them, which is if I was to single out these groups and say, we don't want two LGBTQ people, right? I never even mentioned that or never even said anything like that. So how did my words get misconstrued into hate against a group that, I address with everybody else, I include in all my conversations to everybody else, and I welcome for them to reach out to me and talk to me if they have actual questions or concerns.
Yeah. And do you remember, I don't know if you went through this, but I remember there was throughout the campaign, just say it, Christina, just say LGBTQ community. Like they wanted me to say it so badly. And it's like, listen, I'm not the stereotypes that you're talking about here, just so you know, when I see someone radical, when I see someone who identifies as trans, punch like a trans woman who is clearly a big man, punching out someone else and getting incredibly aggressive and violent, I don't say that all trans people are like that. Like, this is the way you think. Like, this is the way you label. I don't think that way. I think that this person needs help. And I think that they are causing harm because this is what they're saying, that this is allowed and this can continue. And this is a culture that is being made with a label that other people are creating. I don't label anyone as any of this. So these harmful stereotypes based on harmful stereotypes about these people, what is it that bothers you so much? If I show you an example of a scenario that I just mentioned, or, grooming that's happening, or pedophilia that's happening within someone who would identify as a 2S why does that bother you? Because I'm going to tell you something. When people share with me, oh, and this is a big one, oh, it looks like it's happening in the house again, Christina, meaning the pedophilia is coming from a pastor or a priest or something. Whoa, I don't condone any of that. I'm not okay with any of that. And we've got people working on that as well. I believe that if we work on the child, where is the child spending the most amount of time? Awake hours in the schools. If we teach the kids not to be groomed, which when I say the word groomed now, I'm so happy for John Euler for this, is, dumbing down that intuition again. When we do that to our children, if we don't allow that to happen within the schools, how likely do you think it is that they were going to be a victim of a predator in the churches? Not likely. If we can teach our children correctly, we protect our children. When you tell me that LGBTQ community or the individuals in that community are at higher risk for experiencing sexual violence, thank you. That is our argument. We have more and more people identifying as 2S LGBTQ. Therefore, we have an increased amount of people at higher risk for experiencing sexual violence. wake up, you know?
And you know, one point you made earlier, right, about the person who is, you know, beating the crap out of women because now I'm a transgender and I can be a pro athlete and a UFC fighter and beat up women, right? As an example. That example is just an example of somebody who takes advantage of a loophole in a system, right? There is a reason why my work, you know, as an example, allows me to take a sick day or 2 sick days. But if it becomes a repeat habit, they ask for a doctor's note, right? It's not because they assume I'm lying, but it is because some people do lie and some people do take advantage, right? So, you know, a big problem with, you know, erring on one side or the other, you got to err on the side of safety, right? Like, I mean, you got this self-identification, which is good if everybody was a good human being, you know, then they can really truthfully and honestly identify. But there are people that are taking advantage. There's somebody that just got charged for a murder and then says, oh, I'm transgender. That way they can serve an easier sentence in a women's jail, right? There are people that will take advantage of situations in many ways. So there's got to be a better way than to just say, oh, I identify as this, therefore I have every right to go and violate your space.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, those are tremendous points. Like, I mean, where's the line too, right? I mean, where, because the argument is, well, how likely is that to happen? It's happening, people. Open your eyes. Like, it's happening over and over again. The conversation we did, the tent event, someone mentioned like, oh, well, you know, we talked about the women's prisons and how, you know, people are getting raped in there now. And how is this even, how could anyone with functioning brain cells even think that this is okay? And the argument, it's this cognitive dissonance, right? It's this like, how is that actually happening? What, did it happen once in the States? Like, it's not actually happening. It's not actually a problem.
Yeah.
It's absurdity. Like, people really need to start checking themselves with their own arguments, their own words. Just repeat it back to yourself. You know, things like also used against drag performers. Drag performers, I mean, again, I think this has to do with grooming the adults so low that their like instinct has been brought. I mean, again, we're not having the same conversation either, because you can have this argument, you and I, we don't think there should be drag performers, just as I don't think there should be strippers. And then the argument's like, well, they're not stripping, they're fully clothed. It's just because you're uncomfortable with a man dressing as a woman. And it's like, no, drag has always been an adult's kind of performance. Sure. I mean, I guess you could do an adult performance in, like, the Bible, for instance, is, I wouldn't say that's age appropriate as is for a child, that therefore there's children's Bibles. Sure, there's things that are adult really driven, and we can, you know, minimize the intensity of it so that it's more directed to children. Again, what you think is right and what I think is right, we don't have to agree on that. But we do need to have voices at the table to say, hey, I'm a taxpayer and a stakeholder. I don't agree that this is high quality education. What does everyone else think that pays for this education? And then we can.
I want to ask you one question, and just to gather your thoughts on it around the drag performers. Where is this falling in this presentation? Like, are drag performers considered sexual orientation, or is it considered a gender? Because I don't think it's a gender or a sexual orientation, right? There could be a straight drag performer, right?
That's a great point.
So, like, I mean, yeah, are we talking about careers now? Are we talking about, you know, what are we talking about here, right?
Diversity of professions, maybe. Yeah, no, that's a great point, Ahmed, for sure. Like, where is this in the conversation? Yeah, I have no idea.
No,
maybe self-expression. He did mention self-expression, the human rights, and the fact that now people, like, I can see it, we see it, we've got evidence of this, people, like, we've got videos of it, within our school boards, hiring people to perform, or that have absolutely no credentials and no skill or proficiency in what it is they're doing. The only thing they have is the label of LGBTQ or drag. If you're going to get a great dancer, an artist, go, maybe, like, okay, But when you have someone literally lip syncing and just like moving to not even really dancing, and then we pay for that, and we have our child's eyes like they're just confused, like what am I looking at right now? What's going on? Why am I seeing this? I would love the answer. Why am I seeing this?
Me too.
Because we wouldn't just have a woman go up there and not really dance. A woman who was born biologically female and is dressed in a dress and is just kind of walking around lip syncing. Would we do that? Maybe
No.
maybe if a student went up there for some sort of like talent show. Yeah. Is that what you said?
I said like, yeah, not
like
even a very talent show, right?
Yeah,
but
exactly. Wow. I just think we're like really lowering the bar to quality.
Well, I was gonna say the only point I agree here is the last point where it lowers. It's basically lowering the barrier of sexual violence by justifying actions. So that's what I say. Some of these actions that are being taken, like bringing drag performers into kids' schools and stuff like that, is actually lowering that barrier for violence against children. And we're talking about
that's right.
Exposing to sexual acts, exposing them to sexuality. You're bringing them that much closer to sexual violence and sexual abuse. So that's the one point I agree here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of these points, just not in the context he's delivering them, to be quite honest. Justifies discrimination, harassment, and even violence? Yes, yes, yes. Look in the mirror. And he mentioned that when we think our children, and I just stated, because I mean, he's got evidence now, like I just stated, I will die for my child, right? Like I will put my life on the line for my child. And so does that mean I would probably get violent for my child? It really depends, obviously. And when push comes to shove, yes, not just like a perceived fear though. Like, I mean, you'd have to be violent against my child for me to be violent against you. So how about you don't be violent? And then the other part of that is, yes, it is justifying the discrimination and the harassment and the violence that you as the activists are perpetuating onto anyone who disagrees with you. That is the only justification and warranted violence that has been presented here. And
we've seen examples of that on Twitter where some of these activists told us when we pointed, like when I personally pointed to the fact that they've said things that would be considered bullying and harassment and abuse, they say, well, I don't see any vulnerable person on the other end. So their excuse is, I'm resilient enough to take it. So here, I will keep giving it. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm glad I'm resilient enough to take it, but it doesn't change the fact that you're bullying me.
And it doesn't change the fact that it's not okay. And that we can put boundaries up as well. I mean, look at like the disgust, like have you punched a turf today? Like you'll just see like just a random, let's get violent. They've got knives on their shirts. And they're telling, where is I have evidence for this statement, justifies discrimination, harassment, and even violence. I have proof of it coming from that side of it. Where is the proof coming from this side of it? Where? Not from me, not from you, Ahmed, not from David,
no,
not from Carolyn Berjowski, not from Julia. Like, where is it coming from for them to come and state this? There's nothing. And you know what's really sad is that because he mentioned that, sorry, I kind of went on a tangent there. He mentioned that it justifies, like if it's children at stake, then it justifies this, like, again, that fear farming and we're going to get rowdy and violent. Another thing that people get rowdy and violent for is saving their own lives. And when we're being told that you and I and anyone who disagrees with the manner in which we teach our kids this stuff, that we're trying to eradicate and kill, then doesn't that justify their means then? Doesn't that justify the harassment and the discrimination and the violence and the hate?
Well, these are the comments that create that polarization, right? And that's what I've seen from the beginning is we are, we're not far right. I can speak for myself. I can speak for you, right?
I've voted NDP once. I've voted liberal a few times. I think I voted conservative once.
Yeah, and this is what I was going to say is we're standing somewhere in the center. You could be on the right of the center line or on the left of the center, but we're somewhere there, right? And this extremism is coming from not from our side. Nothing that we say is generally extreme. We're not here to say, you know, LGBTQ people should not exist or should not be represented in the schools, right? But what we're trying to say is sexual acts should not be taught in school and should not be represented in books, right? Straight, you know, or not, it doesn't matter, right? So somehow it gets taken out of context and we get put into an extreme, which we're not, right? So yes, extremes can justify violence, but we're not an extreme. So violence is not justified in our perspective whatsoever. From the center, I feel the violence coming from, you know, the extreme left, and some of it come from the extreme right as well. And I can call out both of them because none of that is healthy, right? The moment you try to say, you know, I want to push my beliefs on you, you go into an unhealthy category. But tolerance is kind of something that we should all strive for. And this whole new idea of activism not being tolerant and being anti, saying it's not enough to be not racist, you have to be an anti-racist. Now you're basically going and picking at people who are in the middle rather than going and picking on people who are on the opposing side.
That's right. Yeah, those are really, really good points. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Shall we proceed?
Yes, we shall.
We can be here all day, Ahmed.
Then we have ideological indoctrination, kind of arguing that schools are trying to indoctrinate children. It tries to shift the argument from people to ideas, and it justifies debating these human rights when we're talking about people. You'll see gender ideology used often. This was actually created by the Catholic Church to oppose a UN effort to recognize gender and sexuality rights. And as an example, we've seen in March, a Daily Wire host said that transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely, and that transgender people are not a legitimate category of being. Well, they are using the words transgenderism, they mean trans people. They are trying to eradicate them from public life entirely. It's disguising their effort to eradicate these people, and it is a major threat.
I thought I mentioned this a little bit earlier in our conversation, but this would have been the right time to mention it. We usually oppose ideas, not people. And one thing that I said, and I learned this from my project management experience, is it's never a people problem. It's a process problem. And when you think about it that way, really, if you can have somebody who's open-minded enough to change their ideas once they're convinced of a better idea, we wouldn't have any of these arguments and fights that we're doing, right? If people, and the only way to do it is to debate ideas and talk about ideas, right? So when you put a point like that and basically saying, oh no, when they say gender ideology, they're talking about, you know, gay people. It's like, no, we're not. No, we're talking about the ideology. And you're trying to pit me against somebody, make it me against you instead of my idea against your idea, and whichever idea is better wins.
Mm-hmm. If you have a better idea than what's already in my head, I mean, I'm open to better ideas. Just because we don't like your ideas doesn't mean we don't like you. Like no, it's not. When this was very telling. I don't know if it was you or someone else I was talking to, but because throughout this whole process, when seeing the arguments that are coming in and the attacks on people, and then the attacks on their profession, like we see this, like, who are you and what's your real name and where do you work, and it's like, whoa, can you not have a conversation about your really good ideas? Just talk to me about your really good ideas, and I will tell you why I don't think it's such a good idea, and you can convince me that your idea is really, really great. Like, you have the opportunity to do that. Why are you wasting your time attacking people's livelihoods and like, because your idea is not that great? Is that why?
Well, I think that's what it comes down to is, you know, in a debate, people start resorting to name calling and these slow forms of debates. Once they run out of good points or debatable points or points that can support their viewpoint, right? And they start telling you, oh, well, no, we can't talk about this because of that. Or no, you're wrong because of this, right? Yeah. But if you have a valid point or a logical point that's rooted in reality and rooted in something that we can argue, and you bring it up, you know, ideas don't need defending. They can defend their own selves. Right?
That's exactly it. What I was going to say with that is that knowing what I know about communication, knowing what I know about fair argument and debate, you never attack, you never make it personal. It's like rule number 1. You don't make it
Mhm.
personal. And like, if you have a real relationship with anyone, you don't make it personal. Like you mentioned before, you don't globalize it. Like, you talk about the issue at hand and have a conversation about it. So for me, this was very eye-opening, because again, we're not having the same conversation. We have a group of individuals who believe their truth. They believe that it is the right thing to do to attack a person and not think about their ideas. These are the same. This is the same. We see this pattern, right? Someone has something to say. You post it like, hey, I agree with that. Here it is. I really love the way they formulated the string of words to make this message that relates to exactly how I feel. I'm going to share that with you. And what's the first thing that comes out of their mouths? Not, I don't agree with this because of X, Y, and Z. It's, oh, really? Fox News? Oh, really? Like, it's the
You're
source.
listening to this
It's the
person.
source, and then discredit it. And you know why? Because it's so much easier to label something and then disregard it and tell yourself that you don't actually have to think about it.
I think the root of a lot of these issues, that we're dealing with, is lack of that self-responsibility, and knowing that the good route is not necessarily always the easy route, and a lot of times you have to face hardships, and a lot of times you have to take that, I guess, something hard and go through it, even though there's an easy way that you can go around really easy, but knowing that the sustainable way is not necessarily that easy way, right? You have to take that challenge on, right? But most people would like to lay their responsibility on somebody else and say, I'm not living my full life because this person does this, rather than I'm not living my full life because I haven't done enough of this.
Mm-hmm. Or doing too much of something else. Absolutely. Yeah. Taking ownership for your own choices. Absolutely. The other thing I realized too, more on the last slide in this whole gender ideology, and again, like things like this is what do you mean by the statement, like gender ideology created by a Catholic Church to oppose UN effort to recognize gender and sexuality rights? What do you mean by that? Like, I don't even know. Like, it's easy to kind of summarize it in a context that seems like it's going to prove your point to something, but we don't really know what is meant here. Maybe it's stated in his 16-page document or whatever it is. But the other thing I realized too is because when we're things like disguising efforts or eliminating the existences of 2S LGBTQ community and all of those things, it's you and I are talking about sexuality and sexualization, and it doesn't matter if it's heterosexual. It doesn't matter. Like, we believe that children don't need to be exposed to this sexualization at this age. And right. And so, but when something is rooted in only sexualization, like, then maybe we need to think about that. If somebody's identity, if they are not represented in school in any other way other than their sexual function, I think that is a big problem. And I think that probably might identify a lot of the mental health issues that we have as well. Because imagine feeling like you're not being represented only because of your sexual preference.
Well, yeah. And this is where, again, I may have not had this conversation enough with people who identify differently, but this is where my confusion lies in, is I'm under the same impression that you're saying, that, when we talk about LGBTQ, we're talking about either sexual preferences. Well, not either. Actually, we are talking about sexual preferences. It's, either sexual preference of yourself, which can make you a transgender, for example, because you prefer yourself to be a different sex, or the sexual preference of others, right? Like, I'm a man, but I also like a man, which makes me a different sexual orientation, right? So it's all sexual. And these activists continue to say that these identities are not sexual. Can you explain what are they? If not, what is the other difference between a gay person or a lesbian or a transgender and me, if it's not based on our sexual activities?
Exactly. That's so well put. The only thing that I would say is that I think you were correct when you were saying, like, with transgenderism, and it's not like I know a lot about all this. It's just that, I could see the steelman argument there in terms of trans. But my question is, then you're still either seeing yourself as a boy or a girl, whether or not you were born a boy or a girl, and you're thinking you're the opposite. So when I open up a child's book, and we're reading, it's just a story about whatever it is, and you see boys and you see girls, then okay, maybe the boy that was born a boy is looking at the book and saying, well, I don't really see myself as Johnny there. I see myself as Sally. Maybe, but Sally's still in the book.
That's right.
Sally's still there. So if there is an issue, then that boy would say something like, I find it weird because I don't really see myself as Johnny. I see myself as Sally. Do we need to have the argument of exposing our kids to these things isn't going to make them trans, isn't going to make them gay. So stop fear farming. I'm not fear farming. I'm not afraid. I'm just dealing with the situation at hand. I'm not afraid. I'm stepping up and we're doing something about this. We're going to solve the issue. But the thing is just as your argument is that we're not going to make them trans or gay by propagating this information in front of them. It doesn't matter how much propaganda, it doesn't matter how much marketing is done. They will never, although I believe that gender is a social construct as well in that same argument that you give me. So, but that we'll put that aside. And then, but just as that is true or not true, how is it that if they're born this way, how is it that they won't say it if they look at a book and say, I don't, mom, dad, or teacher, I don't see myself as Johnny. I see myself as Sally. So is there something wrong with me? And then we can proceed. Why can't we do it that way? I find that very interesting because they are who they are. So
to continue on that point, and I might be hated for what I say, but if I take my kids out for ice cream, and this is just to highlight the promotion idea of it. If I take my kids out for ice cream and we stand in front of the ice cream shop and I say, okay, kids, they have vanilla and chocolate. Which one do you want? My kids are perfectly happy. One is going to choose chocolate. One is going to choose vanilla. But if I walk them into the store and I say, they have 137 flavors, take your pick. Right? The odds are very, very low that they're going to choose chocolate or vanilla. Right? They're
paralysis.
Yeah, they're going to have all these, and they're kids, right? So, and they've never tried any of these flavors, right? So they don't know what's good and what's not, right? Now, in this situation, it's appropriate to give them all this choice because I want them to try any flavor of ice cream, right? But when we're talking about sexuality, kids are not ready for that yet. They're not ready for all these different flavors of sexuality and to get confused at such a young age, right?
Yeah.
Why can't you just play with your friends and,
Yeah, absolutely.
Enjoy your innocence for a little bit until you get to an age when you're actually feeling your sexuality.
Yeah.
Right. And that's when kids are naturally, inclined to talk about it and experiment and learn.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's the difference, right? Is when we talk about the pendulum swinging, it's not that we don't need to be more aware of the scientific findings that and changes that are happening and evolution and all of this. It's not that we don't listen to those things and we don't do better every single day that we are here, that we get to do better each and every day when we learn more. So the example of, back in the day when someone would say that people wouldn't come out of the closet because they think they're going to be shamed. This is a great argument, actually. Gays Against Groomers puts this out all the time. I didn't need someone to put a parade on for me or put flags up or make every day about this. And I just needed people to not tell me that I was a horrible person. I just needed people to stop shaming me for who I was. That's very different. When we're talking about the book with Johnny and Sally, how are we going to deal with that? Sure, we need education on not to shame a child who has these feelings and doesn't know what to do with them. Of course not. We need to deal with that sensibly and sensitively. And of course we have to do the best we can for that child. That's not what we're talking about. We're not having the same conversation, about all of this. So,
yeah. And there is points that that I personally don't necessarily agree on, and somehow they get reframed into this efforts to eliminate the existence of LGBTQ people, right? So when we talk about children and the sexualization of children, and they say, so you deny the existence of trans kids and you deny the existence of, I say these are all new ideas that haven't been proven yet for me to deny or affirm.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So don't try to argue that point with me as if it's a fact, because it's not a fact.
Yeah.
We don't know for a fact if they do or not. So
yeah.
I can't argue that point. I don't want to get into it, because if I do say, you know, they're just confused kids or they're not sexualized yet, how can they know what their sexual preference is? I'll get called names.
Right. And I think it's fair to say, you know, and that sexualization will happen at different ages, just as puberty happens at different ages for different children. Of course it does.
Right.
Like, we don't deny that. And the whole argument of like, when that whole thing, like, say it, Christina, do trans kids exist? Well, what do you mean by that? Like, what exactly do you mean by that? And based on what I know to be true right now and all the evidence, I don't know if a child, like you stating, you're not stating 100%. I don't state much as 100% because I know enough to know that I don't know it all. And I know that we're going to learn more. And so no, I won't, as of today, I don't believe that anyone is born in the wrong body. I do stand behind that. I don't believe anyone is born in a wrong body. So whatever you want to make with that, and will my opinion change in a year, in a few months, in 10 years? I don't know. I can't promise you. But as of May 3rd, 2023, I don't believe anyone could be born in the wrong body.
I agree with you.
I do believe people believe so strongly that they are. I do believe that. I believe that people have that feeling inside them that they don't know what to do with that. And I do believe that those people do need help with that, for sure. I don't deny that either. And what that help is, I mean, I'm not, see, that could be twisted too, right? It's like, oh, so you want to convert everyone. It's like, well, firstly, conversion is a very weird name because they were born this way. And so if anyone's converting anything, then it would be removing body parts and stopping natural progression of things. But anyway, again, we could be here forever, Ahmed. We could be here forever.
I know.
Okay, let's go.
Mentioned the idea of eliminating or eradicating. A better way to say this would be called genocide. That's simply what it is when you're trying to eliminate a class of people or a group of people. The Lumpkin Institute for Genocide, named after the man who coined the word genocide, has specifically called arguments targeting transgender people as genocidal logic. And it's really important to understand the logical conclusion of these arguments that we're hearing in our board, in our schools, and across our country. Because part of this effort is to minimize their arguments, to make them seem like they're not a big deal. They are a big deal. In fact, we even have a sitting trustee right now that has tweeted this, saying that trans kids aren't a thing. This is contributing to this genocidal logic that has been being argued and is absolutely a threat to the safety of students and staff. Next slide. We also have connections to other hateful ideologies. So we have this historical connection with all these arguments, but also a very present connection to other hate groups. It's not unique. A lot of hate movements all kind of combine and group together on various issues. It's important to understand these intersections, however, to know how these organizations serve as recruitment for other more violent groups. As an example, we've seen multiple cases of neo-Nazis during anti-drag and anti-2S LGBTQ+ protests. This is a severe safety risk, as these groups have been known in the past to conduct terrorist and violent attacks, and it is a very harmful and concerning escalation. Next slide.
So maybe those are the groups. I know you have to go soon, so maybe we'll just kind of run through the rest of this. I think we've highlighted so many parts of this already, like even, for instance, the tweet. I remember that tweet, I think it was early in the campaign. And again, it's like, you can take that totally out of context. Like, we just had that conversation. I think we just addressed that there. And then, you know, I don't want to be insensitive to these groups. Like when he's mentioning, I'm taking it personally, right? Like the neo-Nazis and these hateful groups that are causing harm, that you've talked about, like how there is this far extreme of hate on the other side happening. But again, like, that's not us. And yet they're relating this presentation to our concerns that we've brought to the board. So it's a straw man argument. Why are you bringing this forward and distracting from the cause and the purpose of the delegations that have been brought forward, right?
Well, one of the terms that were used against us is like dog whistle, or, you know, we have, you know, how many of us have felt a little bit unsafe because we do know that some of these people that are attacking us, for example, have links to somebody that is Antifa or whatever, people that are capable of doing violence, right? Throughout history, for example, right? So, you're looking at them sounding the alarm on, you know, some neo-Nazi groups that are getting involved in the US, not even in Canada. Meanwhile, right here in WRDSB, we're constantly getting harassed and threatened by somebody who claims to be part of Antifa, for example. And, you know, and we're not sounding the alarm. We're not walking around saying how dangerous it is, because we just understand that this is one person, right? And, you know, in our, and that's why I always worry about saying the word movement or the word group, or, you know, but I'd rather say the people that share our ideas generally, you know, there might be all kinds of people in there. There might be racist people. There might be haters of all sorts. But just because you share one of my values doesn't mean you share all of my values.
Right. Of course not. That's the thing that really boggles my mind. Like, this is the principle that I think the other side is this mentality of understanding that we are all individuals. We don't fit in these boxes that you want everyone to fit in. Why would we want to? You're preaching diversity, yet you want everyone in boxes. Like, it doesn't make any sense. There was another thing to that. Oh, Antifa, yeah. I mean, and to know that we have the trustees who these presentations are being presented to, following Antifa, following people who have shared hate. And I'm not one to say, oh, you know, they're following, and look, you know, look here, Chair Weston, didn't you see what Antifa posted about this person? How dare you allow this? I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is there are people who are following these individuals who have been like made known, like it's been clear that this person has spread a lot of hate, yet these people are followers of these people. Like, and yet we're having this presented. It's like complete gaslighting, right? Ahmed, I know you need to go. I should go too. Would you be okay with us finishing the rest of this presentation? There's like 3 minutes left.
Yeah.
And then we'll just kind of close it off. Maybe it'd be a good thing because we're doing a lot of talking, and this way people can use their own conscious thoughts on what's being presented to them, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
These ideologies is Christian nationalism. We might hear about it a lot in the States, but it exists in Canada as well. It's the idea that people are trying to impose Christian values or morals upon a population. Christian being a very specific form of Christian ideals. It's based on conservative beliefs about marriage and gender. There's a long history of these Christian nationalist groups trying to oppose abortion, sex ed, 2S LGBTQ plus rights. It's also often Islamophobic, anti-immigration, and anti-Indigenous, as the colonial project of Canada and residential schools was clearly immersed in Christian nationalism of trying to educate Indigenous people to be Christians. And also there's a very, very strong overlap with white supremacy. Next slide. One example is Voices for Change, an organization that existed in this community. They had people delegating here and organizing people to witness meetings and come to the meetings. The website promoted residential school denial articles, genocide denial, and it was run by a board member of a very large church in Kitchener.
1 minute.
Thanks. And so they have changed to an explicitly Christian media account now, but they are in a church, they are in a leader position in a church, and this is a tweet that I have blocked out because they specifically call for violence against trans people. Next slide. Then we have white supremacy. While the white is the primary part, patriarchy and Western values play a key role in this, and so the existence of 2S LGBTQ plus people directly challenges their beliefs. Anti-Semitism is also prevalent, along with the conspiracy theories. In the US, we've also seen anti-woke efforts combined with this. In Peterborough, there was a protest had a sign calling for the destruction of drag performers from a neo-Nazi again, and hate and violence are at the core of this ideology. And lastly, I can get through it, about how to take action. There's lots of things you can do. I have more in the document for a lot of people, but use the code of conduct to make sure trustees are not spreading hate as they have been previously. Update delegation rules to ensure that we're not exposing people to hateful ideas. Don't implement policy that would require delegations on both sides of an issue. This raises the ability for people to argue human rights. Ban delegations from known groups that seek to violate the rights of 2S LGBTQ plus people. This has been done in BC already. Interrupt delegations when they're spreading hate and stop it as fast as possible, and use legal recourse when possible to continue advancing these protections.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for your delegation. Mr. Burr, trustees, are there questions of clarification? Trustee Johnson?
Yeah, thank you very much. You brought a really crucial concern that's growing in the community to our attention, even as from job. If I can ask, can we have a copy of the presentation?
I believe it's already been sent. Yes.
Done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, Ms. Rydell has already forwarded the delegation.
There's a copy of the full document, and then also publicly online. There's a web version to access it along with the slideshow presentation.
Okay.
So everything will all be together.
Beautiful.
Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Wow, let's ban freedom of speech, everybody.
I
That's the way we can stop this
excitement
violence against
at the
LGBTQ people.
Yeah. Oh, Ahmed, there's so much to go through there. We could do a whole episode on those last few slides. I think, well,
Wow.
you let me know if there's something in particular you wanted to say.
Well, I like the banning of both sides of the argument, you know.
You know you have a good idea when. You know you have a good idea when. Like, honestly, take a look in the mirror. Like, you need to ask yourself, whenever, if you have a good idea, is it not safe to have some opposition to your good idea? Like, when? Never. The answer is never.
Never. Yeah.
I think also, and again, if you have any thoughts on this to close off on, I think that the fact that he's done such a tremendous job, according to the trustees, to prove that this is some sort of Christian religious overtake, then I think the counter argument also stands that if this is so much it's challenging, you know, oh, I wish I had the slide up, that it's challenging the Western. Do you remember what it said there?
I think it was, yeah, right here.
No, it was something about how it's challenging like Christians and the Western culture so much. And it's like, well, then, I mean, if we're in a secular school, if it's secular, then you can't promote a certain religion, but you also can't demote one. You also can't sabotage it, or like, so if you have a Christian and they have certain values, then you can't present another set of values as fact that will then contradict the values of this religion. That demotes that religion. So the ideologies is exactly what's happening. Like, that's what we need to recognize. If it's truly secular, then sure, present these ideas, but as theories. Present them as, some people believe this, and this is what some of the science is showing. And other people believe this, and this is what the science is showing. And allow the kids to explore and have a conversation and a debate. But that's not what's happening in schools today, is it?
Well, we don't want kids that can think for themselves. We want disobedience slaves that will just grow up and work for the system, right? So they can't think for themselves. They can't choose the right idea to prescribe to. We have to tell them exactly what they need to do, or else they're homophobes and transphobes like you and me, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah. School is exactly for schooling and not so much for education these days, I think. So, and a whole other story about, oh, wow. I mean, we could go on about the assumptions and presumptions, these presumptions made that are, they're factual. This is what happened. And this is, and wow, I can't believe this can be real life. Ahmed.
Yeah, we can talk about this forever.
To be continued, right?
Definitely. No, it's
okay. Enjoy the rest of your day. Sorry.
No, I'm saying it's always a pleasure talking to you, and there's so much to say about these things and so much to learn as well from you. So it's
and awesome. You and everyone, right? That's what the open dialogue is all about, people. I'm sure I could learn a lot from this fellow. Like, we just have to have the same conversation.
That's right.
Okay. Enjoy the rest of your day, Ahmed.
You too.
Thank you. For any of you that have been listening, thank you for listening all this long. I hope that it was helpful. We hope to have some more. I hope to have some more, and anyone else who can help put some of these summaries out. Not so much summaries, more of those courageous conversations, I think, are really important to be had. You know, if you disagree with what I had to say, disagree with what Ahmed had to say, let us know. Tell us why. What did we have wrong? What aren't we seeing? What perspectives are we missing? And I really do hope that more and more people start realizing what's going on and having those courageous conversations for themselves. Thanks, everyone.